Have you ever been disappointed? Imagine everybody has at one time or another. Have you ever wanted things to go a certain way only to discover that it just wasn't going to happen? In the scripture readings today from Jonah and from Matthew, we can see stories of disappointed expectations. The laborers who were hired first thought that since those who were hired last were paid $1, then they would probably be paid more since they had worked the whole day. Those who were hired last only worked a couple of hours, but those who were hired first worked the entire day. Those who were hired first agreed to work for the $1. Those who were hired last agreed to work for whatever the owner decided to pay them. The ones who began early in the day got angry because they were paid the same as the ones who were hired last. They got angry because they had an expectation based on a faulty logic. Now listen, I want you to hear this. They were irritated because they had a judgment about the way the owner should do things. Now, in another reading, it seems that Jonah spent most of his ministry being angry. He was angry about one thing or another as things went down. He got angry because God wanted him to go to Nineveh. He got angry with God when the people of Nineveh repented. I've never understood that. When a preacher has success, you're supposed to get excited, but he didn't. He got angry when the plant he did not plant withered and died, taking away his shade. Jonah got angry because he had an expectation based on his faulty logic. Listen, I want you to hear this. Jonah had a judgment about how God should do things. I know you've never done that. Both Jonah and the laborers had great expectations. There can be any number of things which cause a disappointment for us, but all disappointments come as a result of only one thing: expectations. Where there is no expectation, there can be no disappointment. Or as Benjamin Franklin quipped in Poor Richard's Almanac, he said, "Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed." Some folks live with continual disappointment, which creates for them a negative mindset. That negative way of thinking can lead to many problems, including disease, broken relationships, and a generally unhappy countenance. Have you ever met someone who wore a constant frown, and then you ask them if they were ever happy? When they tell me that they're happy, I tell them, well, please inform your face. Now, while that may sound somewhat comical, I gained the thought from the book of Proverbs where it says, "A glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is crushed." Now, there was a song we used to sing with the kids about being happy. You may remember it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Okay? We'd sing that. But the next to last line of each chorus was, if you're happy and you know it, then your face should surely show it. Some people's religion demands that they be somber at all times, never showing a smile. I don't know what they would do then with this laughing picture of Jesus I like so much. Jesus said that we are to be like children. In Matthew chapter 18, he says, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, there's probably a greater variety of sermons on this verse than there are letters in that sentence dealing with the aspects of a child's trust, a child's curiosity, a child's faith. But we're talking about happiness. So this is no different. I'm going to talk to you about the fact that a child is happy. I found a study a few years back that showed that the average 5-year-old child laughs about 150 times a day, whereas the average 45-year-old only laughs about 8 times a day. Seriously? Yes, and that is the problem. Too much seriousness. Being serious shows up in the face in the form of a frown and in the body as tension. Tension in your body. We should know by now that a unhappy countenance itself leads to disease. We looked at that a little bit last week. But Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 22 says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. That's essentially saying that a joyful heart keeps you healthy. A crushed spirit, though, one that lives continually with disappointment, dries up the bones. Now, to me, it's an amazing fact that some people choose to live with that crushed spirit rather than trying to find a way out of it into freedom. It is quite difficult for others to be around someone who lives from this place of negative energy. I don't know about you, but when I get around a person that just has negative energy, I'm ready to go do something else. Proverbs 18 and verse 14 tells us that a man's spirit will endure sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear. It is not only difficult for the crushed person to bear, it is also difficult for those who are around them to bear with that crushed spirit. Now, there's a lot we could be saying about a crushed spirit and how that occurs, but that's not the thought today. There may be many causes for a crushed spirit, but it is inexcusable to remain that way. I'll say that again. It is inexcusable to remain with a crushed spirit. Yeah, but you don't know what... Yes, it doesn't matter what happened. We've all been there. Maybe not in your specific type, but we've all been at the place where our spirit's been crushed as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, as a parent, as a grandparent. Those things have happened to all of us. And we know that there is no temptation or testing that has happened to man, but such has also happened to Jesus. Now, we can grouse about it. We can groan about it. But as long as we continue to nurse that hurt, we will never achieve happiness or peace. Now, from what I read in the Bible and from what I have observed from experience, neither happiness nor peace should only be occasional, momentary events. They should be a way of life. Happiness and peace should be your way of life, should be your MO, your modus operandi, your mode of operation should be happiness and peace. So I assume that many people do not yet realize that both happiness and peace are a matter of choice. You can choose. Those characteristics are not dependent on circumstances. We tend to look at it and think that it is because when something bad happens, we get the grumbles. The problem is we stay with the grumbles. Sometimes long after the event has passed. Circumstantial conditions should never determine how we feel about things, how we look at things, what our decision about things are. You've heard the statement that I think from kids, but adults have said it too. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I think I'll go eat a worm. There are people who live in that place. We have the freedom, we have the power, we have the right, which can never be taken away, to determine how we feel about things. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances to choose one's own way. Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps as he was meditating on this concept. He's not the only one to say that we have the right to choose our attitude in the midst of suffering. Maya Angelou wrote the book called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, detailing her life as an abused child. I know why. The caged bird sings because there's happiness there. It cannot be taken away. Alexander Solzhenitsyn suffered imprisonment for challenging the Russian regime, and he ended up being sent to the archipelago, and he wrote the book, The Gulag Archipelago. Howard Thurman wrote about his life coming out of slavery, and he wrote more than 20 books, many of which influenced the civil rights movements of the mid-20th century. Byron Katie, a modern writer, has written a book called Loving What Is. And she says, the only time we suffer is when we believe a thought that argues with what is. Now, it should be obvious that she's not referring to physical pain inflicted by another person or anything like that. She's talking about the mental suffering we put on ourselves by the way that we think. We argue with what is. When we have an expectation or a judgment about how things should be, we are setting ourselves up for suffering. And that is the word which gets us into trouble with our thinking. Should. We say things like, children should be more whatever. Those people should. Those people shouldn't do this. Don't you know that you should? These are all an argument against what is. What good does it do to say or think such things? Does talking that way ever change things? I think you might have more success trying to teach a cat to bark than changing things like that. What about when we use the word on ourselves? I know I should be. I know I should not. I know I should do. We hear that all the time. All I can say is you should quit shooting on yourself. None of that kind of talk will ever lift your spirits, but it will always put you down in the mullygrubs. It's a negative way of thinking. Now, James writes about this and lays it out plainly that it is our thinking against reality that causes most of our troubles. He writes in chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Now, it sounds like, you go out and kill somebody, but in case you've forgotten, Jesus said that fighting, quarreling, envy are the same as murder. Our criticisms of others for the way that they're doing things is arguing against what is, and it is, in Jesus' words, murder. You're not accepting. We have judgments and expectations about how people should behave. And we base it on the Bible. We think we're right because of that, but it's still a judgment and expectation. We have expectations and judgments about what they should not be doing. When our expectations are not met, we get irritated. When we get irritated, we lash out, either at the person or the ones around us. How often do we get submitted to someone else's rant about something else? Somebody will go off about the government, and you're standing there, and it's just one negative content after another. It weighs on me. That negative energy is heavy. We get irritated because something is not the way we think it should be. Oh yeah? Who died and made you God? Could Jonah have decided to be glad that the Ninevites repented? Of course he could. Could the early workers have chosen to be grateful for having a job which paid? Of course they could. If we could learn the lesson that it is not about what goes on outside of us, but what goes on right up here in our thinking that causes problems, we would be much happier people. We need to get that taken care of. Paul tells us how to do that in more than one place, and I'll share with you two of them. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, he says that we're to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. Our minds need to be renewed if we are to have any hope of success in this arena of the negativity that comes from disappointments. We need to renew our minds. We need to think differently. We need to be paying attention to those things which cause us to think. And we need to take Paul's advice from Philippians, where he says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. He's telling us what to think. That word think is an intensive word in the Greek, and it means bring your mind to bear. When your mind is out there somewhere, grab it, bring it back, and put it on something good. We have a choice as to what we allow our mind to dwell on. You've heard me say many times, negative thoughts are going to come in. Bad thoughts are going to come in. But you do not have to pull up a chair and offer it hospitality. Deal with it. Get rid of it. You can let your mind dwell on all the bad things that have happened to you. You can let your mind dwell on all the bad things that were done to you, all the bad things that people do. And while you're practicing becoming God, you can decide how things should be or should have been. You can continue to live a life of disappointed expectations. Or you can do, as Paul suggests, and begin to teach your mind a different way of behaving. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. The choice is ours. I encourage you to choose life in your thinking. I'll leave you with this thought. Your mind is a garden. Your thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. The choice is yours. Amen.